It's not a crazy claim to say that everyone's body is unique. We come in all different shapes and sizes, and we all have different ways of responding to stimuli. Some bodies have an easier time growing upward, while let's just say some bodies have an easier time growing outward. Some bodies require more care and attention to detail to develop in the ways that we'd like, while for others it feels like they're just born that way. Some bodies can handle certain components and even use them for their own benefit, while others can't, so they go into full panic mode and destroy themselves from the inside out. We've all heard that just because something works for someone, that doesn't mean it'll work for someone else. But I would like to propose the idea that the opposite is also often true. Just because something doesn't work for a specific someone, that doesn't mean it can't work for you. Keep that thought process in mind throughout this video, because you may be going out of your way to sidestep an obstacle that's not even there. But I think it's a little too late to change the title, so I say, for dramatic purposes, let's call this The Real Killers. I would be willing to bet that a lot of people don't even know what gluten is, so let's start there. Gluten is simply a family of protein found in some grains. They're also known as prolamids. These proteins are found in three main grains: wheat, rye, and barley, three of the more common grains, and of course any variants or crossbreeds of these three. There are specific proteins found in these and not in other grains, namely glutenins and gliadins in wheat, saccharins in rye, and hordeins in barley. Gluten is not some estranged compound, and it's not some artificial creation bred into grains to make them taste better. It is simply a group of proteins made up of the same 20 amino acids as the rest of them, and they've been there naturally the whole time. So when something is gluten-free, it usually just means the exclusion of these grains, thus the exclusion of these proteins. However, that is not always the full story. There's tons of products out there that contain gluten that you might not expect it in, mainly because it is extracted from these grains and used for culinary purposes. Gluten is often used to provide elasticity and structure in dough made of other grains, and as a thickener or binder in several other foods, including meats, sauces, and snacks. I'm sure everyone that has to avoid gluten already knows this by now, but it never hurts to check the ingredients of anything you're even remotely suspicious of. Technically, even gluten-free labeled foods may still contain some. The FDA mandates that the upper limit is 20 parts per million for something to legally qualify as gluten-free. This is generally considered a safe threshold for those who respond negatively to gluten. But that right there is the key. There is a specific population that handles gluten terribly. So gluten-free products and diets absolutely should exist for them. But what about everyone else? Because gluten-free can be a hassle, not only to find, but it also tends to be more expensive. Gluten-free foods are often more than twice as much as their normal counterparts, so the incentive to not eat gluten-free is definitely there. So let's take a look at who actually needs to be sidestepping this obstacle. There are definitely people with certain medical conditions that should be avoiding gluten, some at all costs, but for others it would just save them a lot of strife. The first and most serious of these is celiac disease, an autoimmune disorder in which when someone consumes gluten, their immune system mistakenly attacks their small intestine because it sees gluten as a threat. A variety of immune cells release inflammatory substances that damage the villi lining the intestinal walls. Villi are tiny projections that absorb nutrients from the food that you eat. The villi are then not able to absorb other nutrients, which can lead to a ton of other issues related to malnutrition. If left unchecked, this can kill you over time, or at the very least make your life a waking nightmare because nothing in your body has what it needs to function anymore. The intestinal villi can heal, taking an average of 3 to 6 months, assuming a gluten-free diet, though of course it can be longer. It's estimated that 1 to 2% of the population has celiac disease, and it's worth mentioning that it can develop at any age, and many people do go undiagnosed. The exact cause of celiac disease is still unclear, but it is believed to be somewhat genetic. If gluten-containing foods have given you digestive or energy issues in the past, or if anyone directly related to you has celiac disease, it wouldn't hurt to go get yourself tested. Celiac disease is one of those cases where it's best to just cut out the culprit entirely. We understand it well enough to know that it's just not worth the risk. Aside from that life-threatening main example, there are other conditions that would make you want to avoid gluten, one of which being non-celiac gluten sensitivity, more commonly just referred to as gluten intolerance. It's not nearly as serious as celiac in most cases, but it can still cause some pretty bad gastrointestinal issues. Stomach pains, bowel malfunction, nausea, vomiting, and often even symptoms not directly related to digestion. There have been many reports of migraines, poor brain function, joint pain, numbness, blisters, and skin rashes. This form of gluten intolerance is believed to affect less than 13% of the population, though how much less is up for debate. Should you have it, avoiding gluten is not as severe as celiac disease, but doing so will spare you of a lot of pain. As of right now, there's no specific way to test this form of gluten intolerance. It's usually diagnosed by ruling out the other options, celiac disease and a wheat allergy. Speaking of which, wheat allergy, not directly exclusive to gluten, but obviously it's associated. It's an immune response to proteins in wheat, glutenins and gliadins, as well as globulins and albumins. Unlike celiac, which is a true autoimmune disease, wheat allergy is just that, an allergic reaction where the immune system overreacts to these proteins, so its symptoms are more in line with those of other allergies. Nasal discomforts, itchy eyes, skin rashes, and in more severe cases, stomach or even breathing issues. While many people may be able to get away with eating some wheat and related grains, it's best not to push it. Also, some people with irritable bowel syndrome have found that cutting out gluten reduces their symptoms, but it doesn't seem to be a consistent experience. So it should be clear by now that there are some people that absolutely need to opt out of eating gluten-containing foods. But what about the rest of us whose bodies don't give such an immediate reaction? Are we safe to consume it, or is it just best left behind by everyone? As of right now, there is not sufficient evidence to suggest that those without the aforementioned conditions will benefit from avoiding gluten, meaning for the average person, actively following a gluten-free diet is a waste of effort and money. Grains, including those that contain gluten, can be a very nutritious and very satisfying part of a healthy, balanced diet. So I want to shift the focus a bit and address a different elephant in the room. If you're getting negative results from grain products, there's a very real chance it has nothing to do with gluten. It could be as simple as getting digestive issues from eating too many carbs, which, if we're being honest, is what makes up the majority of grains. But I would ask you to take one step further and acknowledge that it may not even have anything to do with the grains themselves, but instead all of the crap that we do to them. I challenge you to go to your local grocery store and find 10 grain products that are untampered grains, because in my experience, they virtually don't exist anymore. They're all refined, fortified, preserved, sugared, oiled, flavored, colored. Unless you're buying the grains in their natural state, or go out of your way to get breads or pastas and such specifically made that way, there's crap. So many other little ingredients that could be causing your issues. Is gluten a problem for some people? Yes, absolutely. Should the other 90% of the population be more concerned about so many other things? Yes, absolutely. The gluten-free push is one of the biggest, most baseless, and most overhyped hoaxes in the history of nutrition. Sure, it has its place, but please don't blame gluten when there are so many other more likely culprits at large. And lastly, let's talk a little about where gluten is in food. Obviously, to start, anything with wheat, rye, or barley and any of the variations of them. Durum, einkorn, farro, spelt, Khorasan, bulgur, frike, and triticale are all included. The other major grain that bears mentioning is oats. Oats themselves do not naturally contain gluten, but they often come in contact with those that do during processing and packaging. So they are best avoided unless specified to be gluten-free, which isn't really that hard to find. Of course, the gluten in these grains extends to any products made of them too. Bread, pasta, crackers, baked goods, cereal, granola, breading, tortillas, gravy, biscuits, couscous, seitan, pizza, malt, and even beer. And as I said earlier, gluten is often intentionally extracted and used in other food products for culinary purposes, including but not limited to processed meats, sauces, soups, syrups, meat substitutes, cheeses, pretzels, chips, candy, egg products, imitation seafood, and of course anything that has been batter fried or breaded. Theoretically, it could be anywhere, but I guess this is just another incentive to actually eat real food. Probably the most important point of the entire video is that there's other grains that are naturally gluten-free, and many of them are on average just better anyway. Buckwheat, amaranth, quinoa, millet, sorghum, rice, and wild rice. And of course there's other starches that aren't grains, from potato, sweet potato, beans, squash, plantains, and all sorts of other root vegetables. Simply having a population that has a baseline understanding of where gluten is and where it isn't would fix much of this whole gluten-free debacle. When it comes to nutrition, there's a fair amount of stuff that you actively need, and there's some stuff that you should actively avoid. For most people, this is neither. For some, however, it should be avoided like the plague. It's just one more wrinkle that shows just how complex this topic can be, and it goes to show how understanding how it specifically applies to you will benefit you in the long run. Now, if you enjoyed this video, or at the very least learned a little something, I encourage you to subscribe as I have plenty more of these on the way. I also encourage you to share it with someone who you think might find it useful or interesting. Go ahead and let me know down in the comments what other components you think deserve the moniker of killer, and remember that all I ask is that you do your own research and advocate for your body. You only get the one.